famous philosophers. That's just wild, the fact that they showed up in your class. And not only that, but they were in a philosophy class.
I turned the camera, it's recording, and look what I'm doing. That's going to annoy the heck out of...
Quality video on the students' YouTube channel.
Okay, so in all seriousity, though, getting back to why Quine is so important. He was a student, notice, of Alfred North Whitehead. And if you recall, Alfred North Whitehead was the mathematician that taught Bertrand Russell, and then became a colleague of Bertrand Russell, who together wrote the Principia Mathematica, which was quite significant. And then he went on and ended up teaching at Harvard, and notice Quine studied with him. Other relationships Quine had, Alfred Tarski and Lesniewski, and Rudolf Carnap. These folks, A.J. Ayer, were all people who were members of the Vienna Circle, which, if you recall, is also where Kurt Gödel attended, and Wittgenstein attended famously. Not happy with what the Vienna Circle was doing, but nonetheless he was there. So this, and he visited other places in Eastern Europe too, and he was there not only as a postdoc working in Europe, but also he was recruiting some of these individuals to get them to universities back in the United States, because of course the Nazis were understood to be hostile to Jews, and a lot of those, all of them actually, are Jewish intellectuals that would probably be in trouble, probably would have died had they stayed in Europe. A.J. Ayer is not, but Carnap, Tarski, those were kind of lured by Quine to the United States to teach at various places like Stanford and Princeton and things of that sort, which clearly saved a lot of individuals. But by the way, Walter Kaufmann, since I mentioned him already, he left Europe when he was 18 and came and studied at Williams College, and then went to Harvard, and then actually spent time in Germany in the military, where he was a translator, which is the same thing, by the way, that Henry Kissinger did. Same pattern. And then they went back to Harvard, where they got their PhDs and so on. But so Quine did all of that, but also during World War II, he was in the Navy, volunteered in the Navy as an officer, but he was stationed down in Washington, D.C. in a think tank where he basically broke the codes of the U-boats, the German U-boats that were off the coast preying on American shipping during the World War II. And then after the war, headed back to Harvard, where he taught until he finally retired as an emeritus. So looking at his books, as you can see, he wrote a few. A System of Logistic, Mathematical Logic, Logic Papers, Elementary Logic Methods from a Logical Point of View. Two Dogmas of Empiricism was contained in that book, by the way, and if you noticed in your textbook, that's the article that's included in its entirety. And by the way, this book was originally put together by Walter Kaufmann. Notice it's now Baird, because Walter Kaufmann passed away in 1980, and then Baird kind of took it over and so on. But it's basically the same format, etc. So that's kind of interesting that Walter Kaufmann has that kind of influence. still. It influenced me, obviously, to pick that one. But Two Dogmas of Empiricism made him famous. It was originally published in 51, 52, and in fact, if we click on the link, notice, even though it's certainly copyright still, I don't think anybody's actually trying to push for that. Although his one son has a PhD and is in charge of his legacy, whatever. But in any case, notice there's a variation on it. It was edited in 61. But so if you read through this, the two dogmas that they're talking about have to do with Aristotle and the idea that there's analytic and synthetic information, which, if you notice, has actually been a theme through the book. Now at the end of it closes where Quine demonstrates that these two dogmas are false, misleading, and so basically it ends that whole process of saying that there's analytic type knowledge and synthetic or new knowledge, and that those are different. If you're an empiricist, you're always equating those two. And so how do we equate them? Well, if you think of the basic square, traditional square of opposition. This isn't the way he shows it in the text, but if we look at the square here, right, you say every S is P, right? Which, by the way, in modern mathematical logic looks more like this.
For all x, s of x, then...
Yeah, for all x, if x is S, then x is P. Right? And these are predicates. So even though this particular predicate here normally would be referred to as if x is subject, then x is predicate. But in that particular context, the subject is actually the predicate if it's a subject. So this is predicate logic here, not so the so-called object would actually be the variable x, right? But actually what defines x is the predicates that you're assigning to it, right? So you don't really have objects, right? But by the way, I'll just throw in here, and we'll touch on him eventually towards the very end of the class. Alain Badiou is a French philosopher. He's in his 80s, 82 now, and he, in his books, Being an Event, that's funny, they have Being an Event there, but they don't have Logic of Worlds. Logic stuff, maybe it's under here. He's written a few books, as you can tell. Logic of Worlds, Being an Event, Volume 2, so that's another. But what he's talking about here are sets, so that all things today, and when we talk about an ontology, which is the study of what there is, then what we're talking about are linguistic sets based on the predicates that we assign to variables, so that we're relating are always going to be mathematical sets in relationships to other mathematical sets. So everything is essentially mathematics, and as a result, he says, ontology is mathematics. So mathematics mathematics is basically taking over, in at least this sense, everything, not just what we traditionally assign to mathematics, but we're basically at the point where we'll begin seeing algorithms dealing with relationships. This is absolutely real too, because I'm sure Facebook just announcing today their new policies with regard to hate groups. How are they going to find hate groups? They're not going to have a room full of people sitting there at the computers looking around Facebook as postings show up and trying to find out, oh, this is a hate group, and fix it. No, it's all algorithmic, so they're going to be having sets of predicates assigned to particular sets of postings, right? So you're looking at sets of sets of sets in relationship to other sets of sets of sets, and trying to figure out, oh, if you get this set, then it should be deleted rather than leave it posted, right? You know, so basically this is very, very much a matter of contemporary work. But when we go back to Two Dogmas, he demonstrates that this statement, every S is P, if you apply a negation to the front of the quantifier, which is this here, right? So this is the quantifier. What does it mean? How much?
Yeah.
Right? So in this particular context, it's quantifying x, the variable, and saying for any of them, so all of them, right? So if you apply a negation to this and transform it to an existential quantifier, sum, and then you follow that up by putting a negation in front of the statement that follows it, you end up with, so from every S is P, I would end up with, it's not the case that some S is not P.
So it's the fourth one, right? Some S is not
Well, it's not the case, yeah, okay, so it's not the case that, so I would have a negation sign in front of this.
Yeah.
So it's not the case that there is an X that is not. So here what I have is S is not P, but I want the negation in front of this whole statement. So it's better in this case to go this one,
To some.
negated in both places, ends up being, it's not the case that there is some S,
Yeah.
or rather exists an X such that it is not S is P. I'm sorry if I'm confusing you. Shannon?
Is this the type of thing that's in intro to logic? Because I'm registered for that class and now I'm scared.
No.
Okay, because this seems like a lot
I
more mathematical.
This is
will
straight
actually,
mathematics, right? Just what the classes is. The class.
It definitely seems like it's discrete, yeah. 'Cause it's theory and groups.
if we had advanced logic, we would pick up with Quine. But at the level that we do intro to logic here, we go back to Aristotle. We start with Aristotle, and I just, at the end of the course, I mention how this works.
Okay, and
Very
it'll
interesting.
probably be.
But so-
easier then.
No panic.
Okay.
Relax.
I was like, I have to go call a counselor.
Sean,
Yeah, I did learn this.
In intro?
in your intro,
Yeah, Scott Johnson taught this right here.
yes.
He taught us all the intro stuff, and then he went to,
Well, I do cover it.
Yeah, as long as it's and then he went.
because we did like a whole chapter of this stuff. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, well, at the end of the Barrett book, he does this. There's actually 2 chapters that lead to this. But when I test, I just test for basic familiarity with it. It's not like I'm asking you to do proofs with this.
Okay.
So, and the reason is because I don't want people like Shannon to panic.
Yeah, yeah. Because Scott Johnson, he teaches you this and proofs. So you got actually like,
Well, it's a political sort of thing. I want students to know and pass on that I'm easy and I get an easy A, because that way I have students and I have a class
yes,
and my wife will get the money.
good to take
That's,
his logic.
Scott, on the other hand, I think his target is being more difficult. And that's great too. We need both of
Because
those.
he has mostly like pilots and nurses. And
Well, who's going to really need mathematical logic? I think it's mostly folks that are going to be in the computer languages and things of that sort. Those are the folks that will find it useful. Or if you're going into mathematical logic. One of my students from years ago took 4 courses with me, very proud that he was very young, went on, he got his PhD in mathematics, and now he teaches here. So, that's happy dance, when I think happy dance, I'm thinking like Snoopy, how he does, that's my version of a happy dance. Okay, so basically, you follow a pattern, and by the way, the pattern is here. This is all on the web. So you just look for quantifier, quantifier exchange, I don't know who Joe is. He's giving us proofs for it. And that looks more complex than what I was hoping for. Pardon? There's, obviously there's, shoot. Okay, so this is okay. So here's the one that I was talking about. See, I've put the negation here. Make this bigger so you can see it. Right, so I go from this, which is all S is P, basically. Actually, in this one, it would be all P is C, rather. But then it ends up exchanged, and it becomes, it's not the case that there is an X that is both. He brought the negation sign in and transformed this, which makes it look much more confusing. I wouldn't have done that in this kind of explanation. It made it more complex than I would have wanted. In any case, it works. So basically, the analytic statements turn out to have equivalence in synthetic statements, which demonstrates that there isn't really 2 different types of knowledge. They're equivalent. And if that's the case, then empiricists basically no longer have this traditional square, which is why if you go back and you look at what happens with the square, you end up with these relationships. Notice this is pruned quite a bit from the relationships you have here. Right? This is traditional, but if we go and look at what's happened, now we just have these relationships as a result of the revision. So it's quite interesting. It was also quite successful and an example of the way neo-pragmatists think. So Quine is an example of being a neo-pragmatist. So let me then talk about his word and object. So this is a significant book as well. So the continuing process that Quine is involved with analyzing how language works. Obviously, Bertrand Russell gets started with this. It's a concern. It's the analytic tradition. How does language work? Which is why they told McGee that those kinds of questions are meaningless, because what they were thinking was, we don't even know what we're talking about. So if you ask questions like, what's the meaning of life, and things of that sort, Wittgenstein would point out things like, what's the meaning of meaning, right? So you end up feeling like, before we can ask these kinds of questions, we have to explain what the heck we're talking about. And so they were going down, down, down into the nitty-gritty of things like definite descriptions, definite, spell it right. I remember having fun with this in college. Remember, I had the luck of having teachers who taught both the analytic tradition, language analysis, but I also had teachers that taught me philosophy. So I wasn't ruined for life, basically. I was instead tremendously pleased with how much I learned. So as a result, when I left college, joined the Army, and went through basic, and the sergeants were trying to absolutely destroy everybody. That's part of your job, right? Destroy your identity, and then create a team member who's going to be green. In the Army, I guess you're blue in the Air Force. I don't know if they do that. But in fact, I was just reading a book called Ranger Games, which is about a young man who, after high school, wanted to join the Army and specifically wanted to become a ranger, and did that. And I believe this is a real individual. I don't know if they changed the name or not, but so I meant the book. I'm not finding the book right away. Oh wait, maybe I didn't spell it. This is the book. But in this book, Ranger Games, the young man joins the Army, makes it through airborne training, then makes it through the Ranger training, and then ends up in his unit, which is at Fort Lewis, which I was at for a while, by the way. But in any case, the experience totally destroyed his identity and created a new person for him that was basically a killing machine, which is exactly what the whole training is for, etc. The trouble was he basically no longer was absolutely proud of who he was. He was kind of horrified at who he had become, etc. But so I'm reading this book and I'm realizing, this kid was totally unprepared for what was going to happen to him when he went to basic training. I, on the other hand, well, for one thing, I didn't go through the same level of training that he did, because I didn't go to Ranger School, because I wasn't an idiot. Well, I wasn't of that mindset, let me put it that way. Instead, I was interested and already signed up for language, because I wanted to go to DLI for Russian, and that's, of course, where I ended up. And by the way, that's totally different. It's intense, but it was the kind of intensity that I loved. It was all academic, 4 hours of studying Russian every night, 8 hours of studying Russian every day. I guess it wasn't for everyone, but absolutely wonderful stuff. And free, plus the Army actually paid me and promoted me. I was E4 while at the very beginning, really, of the course, etc. So it was great. It was a great race at that time. But the thing was, when I was at basic training, and the drill sergeants were right in your face and saying, "You're lower than whale shit at the bottom of the ocean." My problem was not falling apart and crying and wanting to go home to mommy, which really happened to big, strong-looking guys. Oh, they were red, they were done. Oh, just destroyed. My hard job in that situation was avoiding laughing at the drill sergeant, because I knew this was a game. I knew what they were trying to do, and I basically had the job of acting the way I was supposed to. And so I, "Yes, drill sergeant," and knock him out, doing the push-ups, etc. At work, by the way, excellent. I was incredibly impressed at the skills they had, the techniques they had been trained to use. That was amazing, right? But I wasn't destroyed intellectually, because I had all this philosophy behind me. I was an observer, watching how this happened to me, right? And if you think, that's Viktor Frankl. How did he survive Auschwitz and 2 other Holocaust camps as a Jewish psychiatrist? He intellectualized the experience. He retreated into his mind, and what was happening to his body, but not to him, right? And in a sense, that's a stoic. That's a stoic move. You retreated, and you can do that if you study philosophy. Maybe you could do that if you don't study philosophy. I don't know, but at least if you study philosophy and you study the Stoics, you realize that gives you a kind of self-control that you can use in all life situations. So it's very, very, I think, useful to having a successful life. However, but in any case, studying the analytic tradition was also very, very intriguing, because it gets you into math, gets you into complex stuff that feels good. It's I don't know how to explain it, but it puts you into a group that you feel like, we're wizards. Everybody else is a muggle, you can talk about stuff. You can get interested in difficult intellectual puzzles and things, and you enjoy it, and you understand what's going on. And I think that was quite fun to do. But it didn't become my life. So I understood what was going on with it, but I didn't live there. I just became familiar with how it worked. But so this is all, I think, fascinating with where it led. But definite descriptions, I remember puzzling this. The round square cupola on Berkeley College was pink. How does that definite description, which is what that whole phrase is, refer to what we mean as the round square cupola on Berkeley College, right? By the way, it really was there. It wasn't Berkeley University in California. It was a different Berkeley, by the way. But nonetheless, there was a campus. It was a round square cupola. And you think, wait a minute, how can I successfully refer to a structure that I'm describing as both round and square, which is the reason why this was a puzzle, right? I mean, if I refer to the first person in space, okay, we actually would all know who that was. Yuri Gagarin, Yuri, yeah, that guy, right? Gagarin, right? On will Fyodorovi, astronaut, right? But in any case, the 42nd president of the United States, right? You know, so that whole phrase is what we mean by a definite description, because it's working kind of like a linguistic way of tagging a very specific thing. So if I'm in this room and I say that the projector's sitting on the table over there, right? That projector. Well, I pointed, so that's cheating, you know. But basically, if I just say black machine sitting on the roll table over on the other side of the room, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And so as part of how language works, Russell was trying to figure out how that succeeds. Does it picture that? The way, remember for Russell, it was supposed to be a logical atomist. You know, so there's specific elements in the linguistic picture that related specifically to the characteristics of the object that you're referring to. Of course, then it would puzzle him how something like the round square cupola could successfully refer, because on the one hand, you can't have something that's both round and square. So that seemed to be a real puzzle. And yet things like that happened, and it was successful. It successfully referred to that because everyone on campus called it that, right? You know, and I've actually looked for pictures of it, and you know, the hopes to someday figure out why it could be called both round and square, and yet still everybody know what you're talking about. I don't know. I mentioned last class that while driving to here, I passed an individual streaking. It wasn't streaking; it was just walking down the UAA drive in the nude. Still quite significant. I will remember that the rest of my life. By the way, it's one of those significant things you just don't forget. It's also annoying to me that one of the things I especially remember looking at was the one part of them that I shouldn't have been looking at. Why did I do that? Because I couldn't believe it, right? You know, and the nurse running along, etc. But I can describe something like that to you, and you know what I'm talking about, even though you didn't see it. So
I saw it. I saw it from the sky bridge overlooking the road.
Oh, you did?
I saw all the ambulances like pull up too, but I couldn't see like him. Like I saw him, I didn't see like because it was so far.
Did they catch him? Because
Yeah, they
I
kept
drove off.
pinned him down on the ground because he was freaking out. Yeah,
Oh,
that's sad.
that's
It's
a
really
shame.
sad.
I would feel very uncomfortable doing that with anybody, you know.
Police officers don't get paid enough.
No, they
to deal
don't.
with that.
Nobody gets paid enough, I don't think. But, you know, in another sense, of course, we all get paid exactly what we're. Both of those can be right. Which, by the way, I think, you know, talking about the specific problem is why the British have so much trouble with Europeans. Because Europeans are all thrilled with Heidegger and postmodernism and the idea that you can say, that is a camera, that's not a camera. And what you're saying, you mean in two different contexts. In one context, it's a camera. In another context, it's a pile of atoms or something, right? You know, or you know, in other words, Europeans frustrate English speakers because they love playing with language and talking about things that sound like you can't say those two things or three things at the same time. And they love doing it. It's actually a European thing that taxes you to be aware of all the context that they're playing with, right? But when you're from an English-speaking country, you hear that stuff and you think, that's not philosophy, that's not rigorous thought, that's poetic license or something, you know. So So what's happening, of course, is that you're coming from a tradition that's actively trying to figure out how language succeeds in being rigorous and useful and practical so that you know exactly what's being said and whether or not it's true or false. You can test it. And then the Europeans go and they have a ball playing with language in ways that explore the limits of language. Wittgenstein, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. The Europeans say, oh yeah, we'll figure that, we'll break that barrier. And so we'll start talking in ways that just are beyond the limits of what language allows. You know, that's Heidegger, playing those games. And Deleuze and Lacan, Foucault, what they're doing is really obscene from in a sense, scientific point of view. That's why Noam Chomsky is absolutely horrified by the way they talk. If you think of Noam Chomsky on Slavoj.
In one of our previous conversations, you mentioned that theory is not really of an interest to you, nor do you think that it's useful at times for practical application in attempting to combat and change these systems of power. However, one of the more wide-ranging left intellectuals of our time, Slavoj Žižek, takes almost the exact opposite approach to his work. He draws on the work of Derrida, Lacan, and various others to illuminate his critique of global capitalism, empire ideology, and so forth. Can you talk about why you personally haven't written more books on, say, political or economic or social theory? And then what are your thoughts on Slavoj Žižek's work as with regards to how much of it you're aware of or have read or engaged with? And then his use of French psychoanalyst Lacan's work, and then, of course, any words on Derrida's work, deconstructionism and that legacy.
Easy question, right?
What you're referring to is what's called theory. And the reason when I said I'm not interested in theory, what I meant is I'm not interested in posturing, using fancy terms like polysyllables and pretending to have theory when you have no theory whatsoever. So there's no theory in any of this stuff, not in the sense of theory that anyone's familiar with in the sciences or any other serious field. Try to find in all of the work you mentioned some principles from which you can deduce.
Get the idea. He's very critical of, I think, just about all of the Europeans in that sense. There are probably some he would find acceptable. For example, Habermas is probably acceptable because after all, Habermas is essentially a neo-pragmatist, even though he was a student of Heidegger. So word and object is an attempt to really understand how language works. Yeah, the idea is you've got words, and they are referring to objects. So word and object, how do they work, etc. Notice the relationship here to behaviorism, and of course he's familiar with B.F. Skinner because they were roommates, which is kind of fun. That's right. Let me show you a lecture, or rather because I've got lots of so this is kind of cool because that's Brian McGee.
Among professional teachers of philosophy on the question, who is the most important living philosopher? It's not at all obvious, to me at least, who would get the most votes. But we can be fairly sure about some of the names that would be in the top half dozen. Quine, Popper, Jean-Paul Sartre, Chomsky probably, though strictly speaking he's not exactly a philosopher. Well, the first of those names, and one on which I lay pretty short odds, is that of Willard van Orman Quine. one of the professors of philosophy at Harvard. Quine was born in 1908 and is still highly productive, so he's had a long career and it's by no means over yet. He's published innumerable articles and over a dozen books, the best known of which are From a Logical Point of View, published in 1953, and Word and Object, published in 1960. First and foremost, he's a logician, and the original contributions to the subject which made him famous are for the most part highly technical and not really accessible to the layman, though they always had their ultimate roots in problems fundamental to philosophy. However, in the latter part of his career, he's become more overtly interested in philosophy in a more general sense. And I thought it would be uniquely valuable in this program to have a philosopher at the very summit of global reputation talking about the basics of philosophy and of his own activity. Professor Quine, what do you regard as the central